So they got that story coming up. I'm not through with Jermaine Greer being upset at the fact that men are listing themselves as mothers on their children's birth certificates. Stop and think of that for a second. Men are listing themselves as mothers on their children's adoptive, obviously, birth certificates. We've got news out of Cuba, things Cubans can't do that Cuban visitors can do, or tourists to Cuba can do. Bob Schieffer, I had this Friday, and I just didn't get to it. I had a whole lot of sound on Friday I just didn't get to. And it was not by design. It's just go with the flow here. And every broadcast segment here has its own identity, really, and it just depends on my feel for things. But the sound bites we had from Schieffer, now everybody's been using it over the weekend, and he's added to it with his final show on Sunday. And it kind of ticks me off at myself that I didn't use the stuff on Friday. But what we had on Friday was Schieffer saying that the news business isn't what it was anymore. It has forever been changed. There's too many people doing news, and nobody knows what's reliable, and nobody knows what's good and bad or anything anymore. It all started, he says, about in 1988. Something happened in late 80s, he said. He just can't figure it out, but whatever. Now, everybody does news, and therefore nobody does news, and it's not good. It's just his way of saying we've lost or we did lose our monopoly. And now we don't own it, and we have to compete, but we don't like competing. And so I'm retiring. You know, I'm quitting. I'm heading back to Texas. I want to go to a state that doesn't have a drought. I have to worry about this kind of stuff, so I'm going back. Now, he's added some things to it that he admitted they didn't vet Obama well enough. The drive-bys didn't vet Obama well enough in 2008, but then he said that that's not our problem, really, because it's up to the people to figure out what they want, and it's up to the Republicans to tell people who Obama is. Well, he's got a point on that. He really does. Now, I know what Republicans say. Well, we wouldn't be listening. No, Republicans on this, you never had the guts to go after Obama, and you still don't. So Schieffer's got a point. Okay, if the drive-bys are not vetting, we did. We vetted Obama. You know, a lot of conservative media vetted Obama, but the Republican Party didn't, and they're still not. Ha! How are you? It's the Rush Limbaugh program, most listened to radio talk show in America. Telephone number 800-282-2882 if you want to appear. Legendary Bob Schieffer called it a career yesterday as he hosted his final edition of Slay the Nation. And it says here, this is a CBS News story. Schieffer noted that Washington has changed dramatically when Schieffer began covering a nation's capital. Schieffer was on CBS This Morning on Friday and said that the revolution in communications has turned Washington upside down. We now don't know where people get their news, but what we do know is they're bombarded with information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and most of the information is wrong, and some of it is wrong on purpose. I wonder, is that a confession? Be nice if that was a confession. I doubt that it is. Anyway, we have the audio soundbite from Friday that I had that I didn't get to, and it is from Friday CBS This Morning. The co-host on the program was Vanita Newer. She said, there have been so many wonderful things written and said about you at this point, Bob. So many wonderful things written and said. And one of my favorites, Bob, was simply, quote, he's someone that never became Washington, unquote. But I'm curious, Bob, in that chair, how do you feel like Washington has changed from when you started to now?
It's been turned upside down. I mean, as has everything because of this revolution in communications. You know, we now don't know where people get their news. But what we do know is they're bombarded with information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Most of the information is wrong, and some of it wrong on purpose. It is our job, I think, in mainstream journalism to try to cut through this mall of information and tell people what we think is relevant and what they need to know about. That is the job of the journalist, and I have to say it's harder and harder.
That is fascinating to me. That is classic. So obviously he's not confessing. when he says that most of the information is wrong and some of it wrong on purpose. No, and I was just joking about him confessing I didn't expect that. Now listen to this. It is our job, I think, in mainstream journalism to try to cut through this mall of information. Translation, we always decided what was news and what wasn't. We were in charge of deciding what people got to know and what we hid from them, based on several things. Do they need to know this? No. Do they need to know this because it'll help us? Yes. Do they need to know this because it'll help the Democrats? Yes. Do they need to know this because it might hurt the Democrats? No. That's the basis on which the news has always been edited. And now, that's the case more than ever. Mainstream journalism is simply a branch office of the Democrat Party. And it exists to advance the Democrat Party agenda. It's not a generalization, and it's not really an attempt at humor. But he says, yeah, mainstream journalism, we try to cut through all that mall of information, tell people what we think is relevant. Well, look at how much happens every day. Theoretically, there's more happening that could ever be charted. When do you think, this is an interesting question here just to illustrate this, when do you think it was in the history of the world that it was possible for somebody alive to know everything that was known? Is that not an interesting question? It's got to be centuries ago. When was it? This is a question that Mr. Buckley addressed often, and I don't remember who, but he thinks he'd pinpointed the era when it was possible, and it's eons ago. It's even pre-public. I was way before printing press. When was it possible for any one person to know everything that was known? It's so far back. The point is that it is impossible, even now, to chart, and by that I mean write or document, everything that's known. And it's certainly impossible to learn it. It is not possible for a single human being to know everything that's knowable or everything that is known. Simply too much. And in the course of an average day in the world, there is more that happens than anybody could ever categorize, quantify, and report. So Schieffer comes along and says, our job to wade through all of that and to tell people what we think is relevant. Well, right there, with that admission, right there, Bob Schieffer has just admitted how severely limited journalism is. They're not even open to everything happening. Their bias begins with determining that which is happening. What of it is important? Well, how are you going to decide that? Important to who? Well, he admits to them. Well, we know what's important to them. Therefore, he's admitting how limited mainstream journalism is, when in fact journalism ought to be open-ended. Journalism, in fact, is probably what we're now getting more so than we ever have. Like, to people like Bob Schieffer, Matt Drudge isn't a journalist. To people like Bob Schieffer, I'm not a journalist. Of course, I don't want to be one. But all of this news that's out there, only they have the qualifications and the intelligence characteristics to determine what of all the things happening out there is legitimate and what isn't. And you sitting at home digesting as much as you can get your hands on, you don't have the ability to determine what's legit, what's illegitimate, what's true, what's not true, what's relevant, what's not. You need them. Well, what endows them? Journalism school? Where do you go to become a Bob Schieffer to learn how to weed out 99% of what's happening? I'll give you a recent example here that is probably not the best I could come up with, but it's happening right now. Do you know that ever since this Denny Hastert scandal erupted, that you can't find any news on the Clinton Foundation scandals anymore? Because people like Bob Schieffer have decided, oh, this Denny Hastert thing, this is far more relevant and far more important to the American people and what they think about it than what was going on with the Clintons. Really, something that Denny Hastert has done, whatever it is, 35 years ago, has now totally occupied all of mainstream media. And they have eagerly and happily left the Clinton Foundation, they've even left the FIFA scandal aside, to go after Denny Hastert. 35 years ago, whatever it is that happened. Classic example. Maybe not the best I could offer you, but it's one that's happening right now. So we try to cut through this mall of information. We tell people what we think is relevant and what they need to know about. So you are just idiots. You may be nice idiots. You may be engaging idiots, but you're uninformed boobs. And this is the conceit and the arrogance that drive-by journalism brings to its task each and every day. And I would venture to say that the people that pay only attention to the news as delivered by people like Bob Schieffer are probably the least informed people in our country. I think people like you who listen to this program, because you know what you'll get here that you won't get on Face the Nation? You know what you'll get here you won't get on Meet the Press? You know what you'll get here that you won't get in the New York Times or the Washington Post or any of the others, CBS, ABC, NBC. You know what you'll get here? Both sides. In explaining why conservatism is superior, I also explain liberalism. Openly and honestly. The liberals in the country today will not even be honest about who they are and what they want, what they believe, and what their agenda is. Nobody would support it if they were honest. But we are, the people in this audience, I think, are more informed, have a much more solid foundation in which to absorb new events and put them in context than anybody watching CBS News or ABC. And frankly, I don't know if there's any question about it. I'm very proud of it. Cover everything here. Well, I mean, I don't cover things I'm not interested in, but I don't have the hubris to tell you that if you only need to listen to this program. But if that's all you do, you'll still be more informed than if all you do is watch CBS or ABC or NBC or anything else. So Bob now says it's the job of the journalist to weed through all that crap and figure out what people need to know. And it's harder and harder. Why is it harder and harder? Why is it harder and harder? There's more news than ever today. There's more access to. Why is it harder? So that's not what he means. You know what he means by it's harder? It's harder to ignore the stuff they used to ignore. It's harder to promote the stuff that they always have promoted and only want to promote. That's what's harder. It's harder to cover up what they don't want you to know because there are other people out there telling you what they don't want you to know or don't think you should know or don't think you're capable of knowing. That is what he means. Here's Tom in Orlando. Great to have you on the program, sir. I'm glad you waited. You're up next. Hello.
Hey, Rush.
Hey.
Great. I'm elated to talk to you. I can cross you off my bucket list now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Listen, I walk dogs for a living. I'm out walking dogs, and you might hear them pulling me or yanking me, but I'm cleaning up after them, too. I call them little piles of liberals.
Yeah.
I clean them up every day, piles and piles of them. Anyway, what I was going to talk about was Bob Schieffer. I was shocked and not really surprised, but really shocked that he came out and said that. I mean, that's the truest form of censorship.
Right now, wait a minute. You weren't surprised at what he said, right? You know that he was big. You were just surprised he admitted it.
Oh yeah, believe me, I'm surprised that he said it so eloquently that we are the total censors of what you are going to receive out there in Main Street, in the main street.
Yeah, he admitted it's up to us to determine what you should know.
Yeah, like, Bush doing all this nice stuff. Like I was telling Snurley, all this nice stuff for the soldiers. I mean, going there whenever he could. Nobody knew about this. He'd get up in the middle of the night and go out and visit the soldiers who were wounded or, or hurt and their families. Nobody knew about that. We didn't feel like telling them. Or, Benghazi. Maybe to them it wasn't important. This was not important. We're not going to talk about it. Things of that nature. It's a censorship. It's unreal.
Exactly. Well, frankly, when I saw that you had called up there and I saw the subject line, I will be honest, there was a little bit of me that was depressed. Because I've been telling you what Bob Schieffer does for 25 years. And yet, just looking at the call board, it looked to me like you, for the first time, figured out what Bob Schieffer does because Bob Schieffer told you. Now, I understand the power of a practitioner admitting something. It may be more powerful than me telling you, but use this as a lesson. From now on, when I tell you something about these people, trust it. Don't doubt me. And then when you hear them admit it, your reaction should be, damn, I knew this. Rush told me this years ago, rather than, man, I can't believe what Bob Schieffer said. Believe it.